But the dissolution of the Villa Ludovisi was not all that fate had in store for the Boncompagni Ludovisi. One of the most conspicuous monumental buildings in Rome today is the Galleria Alberto Sordi on the Via del Corso, which directly faces the Piazza Colonna on the east. It was the architect Dario Carbone who designed this as a Galleria Colonna, and construction covered the years 1914 to 1922, but final completion came only after Carbone's death in 1940. What's less noticed is that the two arcades of this 20th century Galleria occupy the spot where the late 16th century Palazzo Piambino stood until its demolition in 1889. Here I've gathered some previously unseen Boncompagni Ludovisi family photos of the interior of the Palazzo Piambino just before the Comune of Rome expropriated it and knocked it down. And this was part of the city's long-standing project that was envisaged already, and certainly by 1874, to widen the Via del Corso. And the photos themselves offer a remarkable glimpse into the private lives of our noble family in the late 1880s at the pinnacle of its fortunes. Well, it was the architect Giacomo della Porta who erected this palazzo in 1594, facing the column of Marcus Aurelius. And to create space for this residence, the new owner, Cosimo Giustini, bought up and combined previous homes belonging to other families. And collaborating on Della Porta's project, there was a stellar collection of architects and artists, including Carlo Lombardi. Pomerancio painted the interior gallery, which housed Cosimo Giustini's large collection of sculptures. Well, the palace, however, as is the case so often in Rome, several times changed hands in later years. And in 1819, Luigi Boncompagni Ludovisi, who we saw at the Congress of Vienna, well, he bought the monumental residence from the Spada family, and henceforth it was commonly known as Palazzo Piambino until it was knocked over. Now, you'll see here the sala with family portraits that would soon be resized and exhibited in the new Palazzo Boncompagni Ludovisi that was designed in 1891. But I'm getting ahead of our story. Even though the Boncompagni Ludovisi maintained the massive Villa Ludovisi on the Pincian Hill until the mid-1880s, as we've seen, the Palazzo Piambino still staged a central role for this family in the 19th century, ranging from its spiritual life to the staging of elegant balls. As an indication of its importance, Antonio Boncompagni Ludovisi and his wife, Princess Guglielmina, saw the baptism of their firstborn son, Rodolfo, and 5 of their other 6 children in the Palazzo's chapel. And the tradition would continue in the next generation with Rodolfo and his own son, Ugo Boncompagni Ludovisi. As it happens, Ugo, as we'll see, renounced succession to the Principate of Piombino and became a priest in 1895 after the death of his 2 wives in rapid succession in 1883 and 1892, a story that we will look at later in the course. For the year 1884, this Ugo Boncompagni Ludovisi, writing in his 1921 memoir, Memories of My Mother, well, he reports the family's energetic efforts to save the palazzo from the Comune's takeover. His grandmother, Princess Guglielmina, his father, Rodolfo, and his mother, Princess Agnese Borghese, his uncle, Prince Ignazio, his wife, Princess Teresa Marescatti, and indeed Prince Ugo himself, with his new wife, Laura Altieri, they all left the Villa Ludovisi, he tells us, to settle in the Palazzo Piambino, where we remained to prevent the city from expropriating it for demolition. And there, indeed, the extended Boncompagni Ludovisi family lived, 3 generations, and where relevant, with their own children. Ignazio Boncompagni Ludovisi lived on the top floor. Well, but the family's occupation of the Palazzo Piambino was for naught. Even though the Comune had no clear plan of what to do, they expropriated the palazzo and demolished it in 1889. Now, since there was no plan, urban planners in the years to come had several schemes for the site. In fact, about 70 proposals in all came forward, including the creation of a central railway station. And remember, we already had from the late 1860s on, the Stazione Termini. In the long and very uncomfortable quarter-century gap between destruction and rebuilding, according to the project of Dario Carbone that I talked about, well, the area was used as a party space for the Roman Carnivale, was planted as a city garden. It housed a pavilion for Rome's International Exposition of 1911, and much else. Here's one of the more bizarre rejected proposals. This one's from 1913. Well, we have remarkable views of the family's private spaces in the last year of the Palazzo Piambino. And though unattributed, it's reasonable to suppose that here, too, the photographs were the initiative of Ignazio Boncompagni Ludovisi, the second son of Antonio. He had resided in this palazzo from 1884 through 1889, and he's the one, of course, that had seen to the major photographic campaign at the Villa Ludovisi before it was dismembered. We love epilogues in this course, and here's one for you. There's a new archival collection that has surfaced in Tacoma, Washington. This large catch of materials is particularly rich in correspondence between the Boston lawyer Samuel Abbott and his friend, the noted architect Charles Follen McKim. Abbott was president of the Board of Trustees of the Boston Public Library for a 7-year period, and it was he, as such, that brought in the architectural firm of McKim, Mead & White to implement his vision of a magnificent library building, which in fact was built from 1888 to 1892, that today adorns Boston's Copley Square. There's much in this new archive, but one of the items that leaps to the eye is a newly uncovered letter from January 1896 that finds Abbott, Samuel Abbott in Rome, writing candidly to Charles Follen McKim about the many noble palazzi who were then for sale in the city, the capital of the relatively recently unified Italy. Well, McKim at that time was seeking to establish a permanent home for the new American School of Architecture in Rome. He essentially had founded it himself in 1894. It was, and this is important, an institutionalization of the Grand Tour. It was a place where American artists and architects could go and spend 2 or 3 years working on the site of Rome as an important step in their own formation. Now get this. As it happened, at the time this letter was penned, the Americans were leasing the Villa Aurora from Rodolfo Boncompagni Ludovisi, the Prince of Piombino, since 1883. And as this letter reveals, they were seeking to buy it, but at the lowest possible price. And this long letter from Abbott to McKim in January of 1896, and we'll just look at a few excerpts, well, it reveals much about the spirit of the times, both the perilous state of the Italian economy in the mid-1890s and also upper-class American brashness during the Gilded Age. In this period, seemingly everything had a price, even the Palazzo Farnese, which Abbott insisted could be had for about $1 million. Well, the Palazzo Farnese, which owed its existence to the initiative of Pope Paul III Farnese in the 1500s, was inherited from the Farnese by the Bourbon kings of Naples, from whom the French government purchased it in 1874. Mussolini changed the terms for the French to a lease in 1936, and today it houses the French Embassy in Rome and the French School of Rome. Well, Abbott, in his letter, spells out in plain terms how McKim might best take financial advantage of Prince Rodolfo Boncompagni Ludovisi. Now, there's any number of folks that appear in this letter, from American financier J.P. Morgan to a sculptor named Angelo Del Nero. He had been Italy's special commissioner to Chicago's Columbian Exhibition of 1893, to a Conte Barbialini, who was married to an American named Harriet Hallam Lewis. Well, Abbott writes, "You know, I suppose, that the prince is practically bankrupt and that the only property that he now owns is the Aurora. His palace, which McVeigh, our ambassador, lives in — this is the U.S. ambassador — and the 2 villini connected with it are in the hands of his creditors." So in other words, that is the Palazzo on Boncompagni Ludovisi on the Via Veneto. He has apparently put the Aurora into his son's name. This is probably Ugo Boncompagni Ludovisi, presumably for the purpose of keeping it out of the hands of his creditors. Abbott continues. Barbiolini, in a talk with him, said that he had a friend who was desirous of buying a place in Rome if he could get one for a reasonable price, and he asked him, incidentally, if he would sell the Aurora. The answer was, in substance, that there were some Americans who wanted it and would give almost any price because of the paintings, etc., and that no Italian would give anything like what an American would. So that it would be useless to talk further of the matter, etc., and he refused to give any price. Del Nero reported to me that the prince's man of affairs would not entertain any offer at present, as at the end of the lease, that is to the American Academy, he could make his own terms. And all this is confirmed from other sources. I told Del Nero, therefore, that while you would like the Aurora, that you would not pay an exorbitant price for it, and, as it was evident that the prince intended at the end of the lease to trade upon your necessities, it was better at once to give up all idea of the Aurora and to look out for some other suitable villa or palace, as there are plenty for sale. Still, it's just as well to look about and to disabuse the mind of the Prince of Piambino of the idea that the Villa Aurora is all that you care for. Possibly when he finds out that you're not interested in the Villa Aurora, he may experience a change of mind. Meanwhile, it's best to let it be understood that you have given up all thought of the Aurora. Let it leak out from New York that this is the case. Let your people over here, Del Nero and the rest, etc., understand that you are in earnest about getting some other place and that you don't propose to have any more dickering with Piambino. As he needs money badly enough, he may come forward with an offer. Cash is very tempting to Italians, who see but little of it these days, so it will be wise to let me know just how much you can pay and if I may offer cash down. Of course, if you have to wait for subscriptions and if the purchase is to depend upon the result of subscriptions, you'll have to pay more. Well, in a year's time, Samuel Abbott himself would become the second director of McKim's new institution, which was henceforth to be known, starting in June of 1897, as the American Academy in Rome. Well, Abbott stepped down as his director in 1903, but the Americans stayed on as tenants in the Casino Aurora until 1907, and many consequential American artists and architects lived there. Later, the firm of McKim, Mead & White designed a purpose-built building on the Janiculum that the American Academy has occupied from 1914 through the present day, in fact, 100 years. And Abbott himself lived the remainder of his life in Rome, dying in 1931. Now, how did all of this come to be? In 1885, as we've seen, the Boncompagni Ludovisi had sold a major portion of the Villa Ludovisi, many acres, dozens of acres within the Aurelian walls, for its development into an upper-class residential and business quarter, and that land corresponds roughly to today's Rione Ludovisi. And then the family, in late 1890, then moved into a massive new palace with two adjoining smaller villas that they had built. And this they had built to compensate for the city's expropriation and destruction of that Palazzo Piambino al Corso, which we've discussed. The new complex was on the Via Veneto. It didn't have that name at the time. It was known as the Viale della Provincia, the Avenue of the Provinces. Well, the freshly built main palace incorporated the old Ludovisi Palazzo Grande in a complicated architectural scheme. And the design of this new Palazzo Piambino, completed in 1891, was entrusted to Gaetano Koch, and it faces west onto the Via Veneto. Today it houses the U.S. Embassy in Rome. Well, the problem was that the Boncompagni Ludovisi family itself had invested massively in the sale and development of the Villa Ludovisi. And already in November 1887, a financial collapse in Italy brought constructors, real estate companies, and investors in Rome to their knees, and matters greatly worsened with the Banca Romana scandal of 1889. Well, the continuing crisis forced the Boncompagni Ludovisi in 1892 to sell their newly constructed palace complex in the Via Veneto. And in the following 4 years in particular, we find the family divesting themselves of a mind-boggling array of additional assets. The newly formed Banca d'Italia now owned the Via Veneto property, and it rented the ex-Boncompagni Ludovisi Palace to the American ambassadors Wayne McVeigh for 3 years, from 1894 to 1897, and to William F. Draper from 1897 to 1899. And that is where Queen Margherita of Savoy comes in. She took up residence after the tragedy of Monza on the 29th of July, 1900, which saw the assassination of her husband, King Umberto I. And immediately, almost, this main building was now known as the Palazzo Margherita. Here's a postcard from 1902 that shows the Palazzo Piambino on the Via Veneto at right. And the building on the left is the westernmost of the twin villini that Gaetano Koch designed to accompany the palace. Well, the queen was to live in the ex-Boncompagni Ludovisi Palace until her death in 1926. It then became the headquarters for the Fascist Confederation for Agriculture. However, in 1931, the U.S. government purchased the two adjoining smaller twin villas, and possession of the Palazzo Margherita itself followed in 1946 to house the U.S. Embassy in Rome. Abbott had done very little as director of the American Academy in Rome, and really when the place came into its own and for the first time received recognition in Rome, in Italy, and further abroad, well, was in January of 1904. A new director, who was to serve for less than a year, a mural painter, Harry Siddons Mowbray, stepped in and had the bright idea of hosting an exhibition of not just the current fellows' work, but also past fellows as well, which included, for example, such luminaries as the architect John Russell Pope, who designed the National Archive, and so much more. Well, this made an instant impression, specifically because opening the show was King Victor Emmanuel III and his wife, Queen Elena, and the reports in the international press, well, there were many that firmly put the new American Academy in Rome on the map. Soon it was to move out of the Villa Aurora within a few years and establish itself more permanently in the city.